Hey friends, Tori here with a fun segment of Tori's Tips. I just wanted to go over a few things that might be helpful to your painting experience. Today I'm going to be talking about paintbrushes. So generally in our studio we use about two different types of brushes, a flat brush and a round brush. I've got some examples here. Here are two of what might be a flat brush. One is a little bit more loved than the other. And an example of our round brushes, typically going to be your detail brushes. Round in the sense that there are no sides. It's just like a pencil, nice kind of pointy brush. I have my little paint set up here. I will always have a cup of cold water about halfway full, and I have my little paper towel, little wet dry station here. Your brushes love to live in cold water. Hot water will make any paint that's in there kind of stick into your brush. It'll also loosen the glue that holds the bristles into the ferrule, which is the metal part of your brush. So you want to steer clear of hot water, even though when you're cleaning brushes, you want to think, oh, hot water. No, brushes like cold water. And when I'm not using a brush, it'll always stay there in my water cup. Now there's a couple different things in the way you use these brushes. For instance, we're gonna start with our flat brush. Now when I take my brush out of my water cup, it gets a nice little squeegee on the edge of my cup and a nice pat dry on my paper towel. And if you've ever painted with me in the studio, the joke always is that painting is magical, but we don't hold our brushes like Harry Potter wands. You'd have a very difficult time controlling what happens on your canvas when you're holding your brush like this. So we always want to hold them just like a pencil. There is a little rumor that says with the more experience you have, the farther back you hold it. But for us in a little more of a novice state, we're gonna start right here, just like a pencil. Now this is a flat brush, which means there's two sides. There is the fan of the brush, which typically everybody knows the side. That's the fat side that you spread that paint out when we're filling up our backgrounds. But we also have another side of this brush called the blade of the brush. And if you look right there, it's kind of like an ice skate. That's the very tip part of your brush. All right? Now when we're loading paint onto this brush, I'm not gonna just right into my paint, because then always look at your brush. This is a tool that determines what happens on your canvas. So if you look at your brush and it's a mess, chances are a mess is about to occur on your canvas. So if I have a bit of a blob here, I might go scrape my brush flat and flip my brush over and scrape it flat in my paint. That way there's just an even coat of paint on both sides of my brush, and my brush keeps its shape. Now I'm gonna mix a little bit of a gray here and give us a little example of different ways to use this brush. So as I've said, we're gonna hold it nice and close. If your brush looks like this after mixing your paint colors, that is a mess, right? Even though my brush is flat, there's a big mess happening here on the ferrule of my brush, which is that metal part that connects to your bristles. You can always give that a nice wipe off on that paper towel. Acrylic paint is what we're using here, and acrylic paint dries very quickly. So that's a quick way to ruin a brush if it dries really crusty into the ferrule with your bristles. So it's just nice to kind of keep your brushes tidy. But I've given it a nice flip and scrape. And an important thing about when using a brush is your pressure. Something to keep in mind when you want to do lines or details or trees even, which we'll go into that into another segment. But if I am going to use the fan of my brush, there's two sides, so I can go all the way across and then all the way back. And when I'm filling out my background, for instance, I want to paint this like the walls of my house, spreading it flat. If I have any big kind of slugs of paint, that will never dry. It's gonna look a little wonky. So I wanna spread it out nice and flat. That's the best side of the brush to really spread all this paint out and fill up your background. Now, if I were to use the blade of my brush, I definitely want my brush to be flat, so I've scraped it flat on both sides. And I'm going to press all of my bristles at once to the canvas. I'm not gonna do the corner or the corner, because then you don't know what size lines you're gonna get. I'm gonna go flatten my brush again, put all the bristles down, and take it down. I'm not doing this, because that's when happy accidents occur. I'm gonna take it just like an ice skate. You want it to be touching and then drive it down. So you can kind of see the difference between that nice thin line. I'm pressing lightly using the ice skate part of my brush. Now, the harder you press, the more paint comes out of your brush. So the harder you press, the bigger your line is gonna be. That's just how it works. So that's always something to keep in mind. If you're doing branches or little lines or details, the harder you press, the bigger your line is gonna be. So that's a fun little note about our flat brush. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in my water cup for now. And I'm gonna pull out my round brush. Now, applying paint to your round brush is a little different than your flat brush, right? There are no sides to this brush. It's just like a pencil, it's round. So when I'm going into my paint, I'm not gonna dive right into it because that's gonna smush my bristles and open them up. And I wanna keep my brush nice and crisp at this nice little point. So what I'll do when I go into my little pile of paints, we'll use black this time, I'm actually gonna hold my brush kind of flat to my plate and give it a little twirl. Twirl, 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 and then kind of twirl away. So now if I look at my brush, I've got paint all the way around and my brush is still at a point. If I go and stir it in my black paint like this, and then look at that, that's just a big goopy glob. So I can always, if this happens, go somewhere there is no paint and twirl it one direction and pull down and away. And now my brush is back to a nice point. You can hold it nice and close. And with gentle pressure, I can draw little lines. The harder I press, of course, more paint comes out. But your bristles kind of trail behind you with a long bristled brush like this. So that's just a little tip on how to apply paint to your brushes. We're gonna go into more details in further segments about details such as like your trees, what type of different brushes you would prefer for different types of things. And you can always practice. If you're ever taking a class and the instructor suggests this brush, you can always try a different brush. Try to see, what you can do and test your limits, test out your tools and see what works best for you. But for today, I think that's all I have about brushes. Thanks for joining me. See you next time. Okay, I'm gonna do it right there.